Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening I'm joined by David Kadosh. He's the Executive Director of Zionist Organization of America's West Coast region. David, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, who are you? What is the Zionist Organization of America and how did you get involved?
Yeah, so I started with ZOA on the East Coast. Which is actually where the organization is primarily based. It's a very East Coast-centric group. Most of our historic chapters are based there. The main office for ZOA is in New York. That's where I'm from originally. And so upon graduating university, I was at Hofstra University on Long Island. I was recruited by ZOA to start in the campus department, doing mostly outreach to young college students working in the Northeast region. After a few years in that region, they asked me to restart ZOA's operations on the West Coast. There had been a vacuum of about 2.5 years without anybody in the position. And I was sent to Los Angeles at first to restart campus efforts there. And it was at the time that I was managing the department. And then about 3 years ago, I came to the Bay Area as a community outreach role as executive director for the Western region. And I've been ever since up here.
So, what's your background? What would draw someone to get involved with an organization like ZOA? I mean, it was an upbringing.
Oh, yeah.
What was it?
Well, ZOA is a historic organization. So, especially in New York, many people have known of ZOA for a long time. In the West Coast, it was a little bit more unfamiliar because we just didn't have the structure here. But ZOA was founded in 1897 at the First World Zionist Congress in Switzerland. So we are the original voice for American Zionists. It was actually at that conference where our founders said that there was such a representation of American Jews at the conference that we needed a separate organization beyond the World Zionist Organization to speak for American Jews. Right. And so ZOA was part of the founding of the State of Israel and has that historical background. But besides that, my own personal background is tied to Israel. My father was born in Morocco, but left when he was very young, grew up in Israel, and almost all of my family on his side is still there. Some of my mother's family is also in Israel. So it was always a second home to me. And whenever I'd have breaks from university, I'd go and spend entire summers in Israel, visiting family and just getting to know the country. So it was always very close to my heart.
Right. So ZOA helped to establish the State of Israel. But, I mean, obviously it's been established for a while. The fight goes on.
Oh,
what
sure.
do they work on now?
Most of our work is education and advocacy in America. We do have an Israel office, but through our many departments around the country, we have a Center for Law and Justice that combats anti-Semitism in the public sphere in America. We have a Center for Government Relations in Washington, D.C. that's building relationships with our elected officials. And the campus department, of which I was a part, is mostly focused on education and advocacy for the youth, which has been an assault on Israel on American college campuses for many years now. It's been progressively getting worse. And so ZOA was part of the stemming of the tide on those campuses. Now my role as community outreach is mostly focused on the community. I was brought here to the Bay Area because of the pervasive anti-Israel sentiment, the presence of so many anti-Israel activities and organizations in the area. But part of the problem here is that it's also coming to some extent from within the Jewish community, this questioning of Israel and demonization of Israel. Also, I think most of it comes from a lack of understanding of Israel's moral clarity and the basics of its justification under international law.
And so you covered a lot of topics in those few breaths.
Oh, sure.
So, I mean, we live in the Bay Area. This is the land of tolerance, of people of various backgrounds, and you're using words like anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have proof of these kinds of things?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we can talk about specific examples. I'm sure we'll get into some of the ones that are going on today. But this past weekend, there was a rally through San Francisco where they were using Arabic phrases that you'd see in riots in Israel Beruch Bedam Inshal Bil Al-Quds, saying that through strength and through blood, we will reach Jerusalem. And this is a call to violence that the arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat used throughout the past intifadas, which were terror campaigns launched against Israeli civilians. And we see that being chanted on the streets of San Francisco. There are professors at UC Berkeley, like Hatem Bazian, who is the founder of SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. It sounds like a positive movement, but none of their activities have to do with Palestinian rights or Palestinian issues. It has to only do with demonizing Israel and attacking Israel. And this is pervasive. I mean, the anti-Semitism is outright, and we'll talk about specific cases in the school system, hopefully in Alameda. But beyond that sphere, we see a lot of it is the contemporary anti-Semitism, which is masked as anti-Israel activity.
Right. So you're not just being overly sensitive. You've got actual proof that people are calling for death and destruction of Israel, the Jews, and others.
It's alarmingly common in this area.
And you would expect, I mean, yes, there's freedom of speech, but when you're calling for outright violence or extermination of populations of people, you would think it would be taken seriously. But do you feel like the shoulders just been turned?
What we consistently ask for is not special treatment for the Jewish community here, but that Jews should be treated like every other community. And so if there is an attack on the African American or Muslim community in the Bay Area, it evokes a tremendous response from the community.
Right.
And the same does not happen when Jews are attacked.
Okay. So you talked about Alameda. What's going on over there?
So I was first contacted about the situation in Alameda by concerned parents that there wasn't enough being done for Holocaust education, Holocaust remembrance. There was many instances throughout the year where they could have brought in speakers or done programs to educate the greater student body about this issue. And they saw that there was a lacking, that they used to host Holocaust survivors in years past,
right.
But maybe it was a change in administration. They stopped the program at the school and instead launched a campaign called Everyone Belongs Here, which they were highlighting other minority groups, namely LGBTQ organizations and the Arab Americans. They had an entire month in April this year dedicated to Arab American History Month. But in May, the following month, our President Donald Trump had claimed it would be Jewish American History Month. And there was no programming done of course, to recognize the tremendous contributions the Jewish community has done in America.
Right.
So we saw that attitude of a lack of programming. That's how I first got in contact with the families. And then what came out from my discussions with them was that it's not only happening in the high school, but in the elementary and middle school, there was tremendous incidents of vandalism, anti-Semitic graffiti, swastikas being drawn. There was harassment of individual students. So one of the girls that we worked with, she was 13 years old at the time of the incidents, where fellow students were calling her derogatory names like kike, saying that Hitler should have finished the job. And they were harassing her with text messages. One of them used this image. It's a commercial image of Mr. Clean, except he was wearing a Nazi SS uniform. And they said, Mr. Ethnic Cleansing.
Wow. So, I mean, these are not just accidental things. These are deliberate, potentially violent,
deliberate and
hate speech.
And it's scary how young the students are who are doing it,
right?
Because they are the same age as her. They're 13 and 14-year-olds who are doing this, and it obviously is a product of their upbringing. And I think that's part of it, is the tremendous animosity towards Israel. And Israel, of course, is the one Jewish country. That same animosity is then directed at the Jewish community here.
Right. And so, were there ramifications for the students that were evoking the hateful speech?
No, and unfortunately, we've been working for many months now with the superintendent of the school and the other administration, and unfortunately, they haven't taken action. They did not discipline the students involved. One of them has since returned. He was a foreign exchange student from Germany. His host family was alerted to the incident, but his family in Germany, where the crimes that he committed would be illegal, he would go to jail or have a probationary period as a minor in Germany, because anti-Semitism is clearly banned in Germany, since, of course, the history of the Holocaust. He had nothing done to him. Both students were not suspended or had any disciplinary action.
Okay. And so, and you're talking about Holocaust programming being removed.
Yeah.
This seems like it would even go beyond the Jewish community. I mean, yes, Jews were involved, but it's kind of one of those ugly milestones in history that showed what could happen if one race or another was chosen for extermination. Was there any response on that level from the community?
Well, we encourage them to at least accept our help to find a speaker. You know, part of their excuse for not hosting programming was that it's getting more and more difficult to find a Holocaust survivor to bring in to speak. But I know many within our network, and as a large organization that's national, we can help facilitate those kinds of speakers. So we've offered it to the school. We still offer it to the school district, and we'd be happy to bring in age-appropriate speakers to any of the schools within the district.
Right. But no response?
Not yet, no.
Okay, great. So one example, there can't be more, can there?
No, there are. Just a little bit outside of the Bay Area, about an hour and a half from here, in Davis, California. Over the summer, there was a ratchet up of tensions in the Middle East, where Mahmoud Abbas, who himself wrote his thesis denying the Holocaust, and he's the representative of the Palestinians officially, although he's now in his 10th year or so of his 4-year term, maybe 11th year. He has not had elections since, because the last time the Palestinians held elections, Hamas, the terrorist group, won the elections. So he is the representative, and he called for his people to step on the Jews, not allow any Jews on the Temple Mount, and that Jerusalem should be filled with the blood of the Jews. And so that hatred was then spread throughout the network of mosques in this country. Many Muslim preachers throughout America were preaching the same words, the same rhetoric, where there's a verse from the Quran that they quote, where they say there's, in the end of days, that every tree and every stone will tell the faithful Muslim that there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him. And not the Imam, Amar Shaheen, who is a learned scholar in Islamic faith, he was preaching beyond this. He called for the total annihilation of Jews. You can look up his exact words. He said, every last one, from their children to their elderly, must be exterminated. And this video was not only, this speech wasn't only given to his mosque locally in Davis, they published the videos online. So he's reaching a much wider audience. And we see what radicalization can do. Just the other day, there was a bombing in New York City, attempted bombing of the first time of a suicide bomber on our streets. And we see the same thing. Actually, we had a security expert from Israel come to the region last year because he was speaking about this idea of Palestinian terrorist tactics, which have been tested on Israel for so many years, now being applied to other regions in the world. We see it in Europe and we see it here in America, where vehicular attacks are taking place. We saw it in Ohio on a campus where a Somali immigrant used a vehicle to assault students, and then he got out and started stabbing them. And these videos are posted online. You can see the same tactics applied in Israel on the streets of Jerusalem and other cities.
Which is interesting. I mean, because obviously Israel and Jerusalem specifically have been in the news in the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
And it's been controversial, but that the administration would be acknowledging Jerusalem as potentially the capital of Israel. Why is that even an issue?
I think it's mostly controversial because of who did the recognition. Okay?
Well, there's that. So anything Trump gets involved in is going to be opposed.
That's the pervasive problem in American culture today, is that anything that Trump associates with, or that anyone who associates with Trump, is then demonized, and it's pervasive throughout our media, right, unfortunately. So that I think is why they're taking that stance. In general, many American presidents have said that they believe the embassy should be in Jerusalem. You can go back and hear Bill Clinton, George Bush, President Obama saying the exact same words that President Trump did. He is the only one who held to his campaign promise and actually signed the waiver to move the embassy. So I think it's a step in the right direction. It took a tremendous amount of courage and bravery. He had to stand up to members of his own administration. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was against the move. The State Department, historically until today, has a problem of many of the staff have an Arabist approach to the Middle East and don't really recognize Israel at all.
Right. There are maps without Israel drawn on it.
And one of the issues that ZOA had been working on for many years and even went to the Supreme Court to lobby on was this issue of the Jerusalem passports, that American citizens born in Jerusalem, the holiest city for Jews, they have on their American passports as their place of birth, Jerusalem only, not Jerusalem, Israel. So it doesn't even recognize that Israel is a country or that Jerusalem is inside of Israel.
Wow. And so where do you see that going? What are the ramifications of recognition that the embassy should be moved? And
so I think if you look historically at the instances where Israel was able to make peace with its Arab neighbors, the peace accord with Egypt and the peace accord with Jordan, both times it's because the parties involved, the Jordanians and the Egyptians, realized that they couldn't exact territorial concessions from Israel through war. Okay, and so they both realized that war wasn't getting them anywhere. So after successive wars, okay, throughout Israel's history and its formative years, the Jordanians and Egyptians realized it's better to get along with the Israelis and have some kind of a relationship with them than not. And so then they sought peace. And I think the same is true for the Palestinians. The Palestinian Arabs, is that whenever they see Israel exacting concessions, when Israel withdrew from Lebanon in 2000, they had a security barrier in place in Lebanon because of rocket fire that was launched by Palestinian terrorists and also by Hezbollah, which is a terrorist group funded by Iran. They were shooting rockets into Israel, and that rocket range was about 40 kilometers, the range of a Katyusha rocket. So Israel occupied southern Lebanon in order to create a buffer zone for those rockets. When they left in disarray in 2000, within a few months, the Palestinians rejected peace with Israel, even though they were offered 97% of what they were asking for in terms of territory, and launched the Second Intifada, which was near daily suicide bombings, shootings, car rammings, different attacks throughout Israel, which only ended when Israel controlled the situation and applied this security barrier that they put between the majority Palestinian cities and the rest of Israel.
But so then there are no attacks happening in Israel right now. It's just, it's all peaceful. All the neighbors are lovely, right?
We've seen a shift in attacks. And that, I think, is very important to note, because during the Second Intifada, the Palestinians, first of all, had access to Israel. Many Palestinian Arabs were employed in Israel. And they had freedom of movement. And and that freedom of movement also was taken advantage of to bring in weapons and bring in terrorists. So once Israel controlled the border, which is something we have a lot of discussions about here in America today, it changed the situation on the ground. And we saw in the last Intifada, the quote-unquote stabbing Intifada, the reason it was called that is because the Palestinian terrorists had to resort to low-level terror tactics in order to attack and kill Jews and civilians. So they were using knives, they were using cars, vehicles to attack, and they didn't have the same access to bring in guns or explosives.
So border security works?
Border security works. And I think the Trump administration is speaking with Israel to learn from how they developed this smart technology for their border. Because if you speak to an anti-Israel activist, they'll tell you that this is a wall that separates the Palestinian Arabs from the rest of Israel. It's not a wall. Only 4% of the entire barrier is a wall. Most of it is a smart fence that has electronic sensors and can detect when somebody's approached the fence or tries to cut the fence to infiltrate. So it utilizes cameras, it utilizes observation posts. That does prevent some attacks. But I'll tell you, Gaza, for instance, the Gaza Strip, it's a much smaller area, and it's had a barrier set up for many years. But that doesn't stop infiltration. So in 2005, an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, was kidnapped because the Hamas terrorists dug a tunnel into his base, to a forward operating base, and brought him back into the tunnel and kidnapped him, held him for many years in poor conditions. So the only way, and that's because there's a lack of an Israeli presence. Israel withdrew unilaterally from the Gaza Strip in 2005. But because there's no Israeli action in Gaza, regular action where the military is there to arrest and confront terrorists, that's why with that power vacuum, they're able to shoot rockets over the wall. They're able to dig tunnels under the wall to attack Israel. So the reason that it's different in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank is that Israel is active in those Palestinian villages and cities to confront terrorists at the source,
right,
to disrupt weapons caches, arrest terrorists, and hold them accountable.
And yet, if we look at this and we look at Gaza and everything else, and there's this uproar amongst many anti-Israeli support infrastructure type folks, it's surprising to me that they're not at all in objection to rockets being fired into schools or into civilian. It's not like it's against military operations necessarily, it's against civilians, and yet there's no uproar, there's no angst.
So we have a powerful trip that we'd run now 4 times a year to Israel. We have 3 campus trips to bring college students. We also have a Purim mission for adults, which is leaving at the end of February this year. It's a powerful trip to go and see these places, these communities that are affected by the rocket fire.
Right.
Because people forget what it's like to live under constant threat of rockets.
Right.
In areas deeper in Israel, they have a warning system where you'll hear air raid sirens if a rocket is incoming. So you at least have time to gather what you can. Maybe it's grabbing your child, maybe it's grabbing your important belongings and get to a shelter.
Right.
In the small Israeli towns that are on the border with Gaza, they have less than 5 seconds to get to a shelter. So they have to take whatever they can and run right to a shelter. Many of them have safe rooms in their house that protects against shrapnel, but not a direct hit from a rocket. And you go to some of these towns, I don't know if you're familiar, but in 2005, Israel uprooted 9,000 Jews from Gaza that were living there, getting along for the most part with their Arab neighbors. They had flourishing businesses. Most of Israel's agricultural exports were coming from the Gaza Strip at the time. And all of those families were relocated back beyond this imaginary border to the other side in Israel. Those people are living in poor conditions, and their shelters are just a sewage pipe, a big concrete sewage drain, which if it took a direct hit from a rocket would not survive it.
Right.
So it's very scary for those families. In fact, in Sderot, which is one of the major cities on the border,
right,
the kindergarten is completely bomb-proof, explosive-proof.
So you have to bomb-proof your kindergarten. Makes a statement.
Oh, yeah.
So what's the solution if these Israeli occupiers weren't there and they were just peaceful and let the Palestinians do whatever they wanted? Wouldn't it just be peace and calm and the rockets would stop?
Well, I think, I forget who the quote is attributed to, but they say that if Israel were to put down its arms, and what would be the next day? It would be the annihilation of Israel.
Exactly.
And if the Arabs put down their arms, there would be peace the next day. Israel has never been an offensive force. The name of the Israeli military is the Israel Defense Forces.
Right.
And it's true. If you look at every military engagement that they've been involved in, it's not been offensive.
It's been defensive.
It's been defensive. Even the Six-Day War, where they launched a preemptive strike against the Arab armies, it was because the Arabs had violated and taken steps that are considered acts of war by blockading the Straits of Tiran to the port of Eilat in southern Israel, and also introducing tanks and heavy military equipment to the Sinai Peninsula, which was a demilitarized zone at the time.
Well, David, you've covered a lot of ground, and we're out of time for now, but if somebody wants to learn more about ZOA or the things you're working on, or just more on alternate perspectives of what's happening in Israel, is there a website?
Yeah, you can find us on www.zoa.org, and that can connect you to all of the regional websites as well. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media, just at the Zionist Organization of America.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for joining us. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
Some people think that a meeting of conservatives in Silicon Valley could fit in a small room. In fact, when the Conservative Forum was founded in 2003, we did meet in a small room, a coffee shop in San Jose. It doesn't get more grassroots than this. It may surprise you that there are thousands of people right here in Silicon Valley who share your principles of liberty, free markets, and limited government. Since our humble beginnings in that coffee shop, we've outgrown 3 meeting halls. From San Jose to Gilroy to Mill Valley, we bring hundreds of people together each month from all over the Bay Area to promote the principles of American liberty. How do we do it? It starts with a stellar lineup of speakers. Speakers like Steve Forbes, Senator Jim DeMint, Dr. Victor Davis Hanson, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Andrew Breitbart, Pamela Geller, and many others. These speakers passionately articulate our shared principles, and remind us why conservatism isn't just the smart choice, it's also the moral choice. Our monthly meetings are only one dimension of the forum. We underwrite The Right Side, a monthly television show on cable access channel KMVT. We also host a monthly Constitution discussion group and provide tables at our meetings for more than a dozen local groups who share our love of liberty to promote their specific cause. The Conservative Forum is the premier place in Silicon Valley for conservatives to gather, become invigorated, motivated, and empowered. We welcome guests to our monthly meetings and offer special discounted pricing to first-time visitors. Take a look at our speaker lineup in the coming months and join us to learn why we say liberty is made in America.
And that was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. And we've appreciated their underwriting this show for the last 6 seasons. We found out this evening that they have already underwritten the 7th season. So we're looking forward to working in collaboration with them going into 2018. But what they're best known for is their speaker series, which is held monthly at 7 o'clock at the IFES Portuguese Hall at 432 Sterling Road in Mountain View, California. It's about 3 minutes here from the studio. This evening, here in December, Andrew Clavin will be speaking. We've had the opportunity to recently interview him on the show. In January, Lance Izumi, he's the Corrett Senior Fellow in Education Studies and the Senior Director for the Center of Education at the Pacific Research Institute. In February, Dr. Gary Wolfram, he's the William E. Simon Professor of Economics and Public Policy at Hillsdale College. He'll be speaking, but if you'd like more information on what's happening at the forum, you can find that at theconservativeforum.com. The relationship that the United States has with Israel is an important one for many of us that are on the conservative side of things, but we often don't get the full picture of what's happening in Israel, or we often don't get the full view of the anti-Semitism that still exists within the country when we're outside of pockets. And when we're in an area that is as heavily represented by the Jewish community as California is, it should come as a shock and a surprise how much anti-Semitism and hate for the Jewish community actually exists here. But as David shared with us this evening, it's more prevalent than many of us might believe, and it's something that I think we should be aware of, and in the name of tolerance, should be defending the rights of the Jewish and Israeli community as much as we do defend the rights of the other communities that are in the minority. And I think everyone feels a minority status at some point. Just love of one another and humankind should call us to action. You can find out more about him and the work that they're doing at ZOA by Googling Zionist Organization of America or reaching out at ZOA.org, and I encourage you to do that. In closing, this has been The Right Side. I've been your host and will continue to be your host even into next season, Chris Pareja, and look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll address your issues and concerns there. Thanks again, and have a great evening.